Welcome back to Visited by Voices Live on Monday, the first Monday of the year that really feels like autumn here. Temperature was a little cold this morning. I was overjoyed to put a hoodie on. It made me feel like I was alive finally after a very hot summer. I'm joined today by special guest Todd Keisling. Todd actually did not come to me by my normal methods. Normally, I will go towards artists who I have been following or I'm super aware of. This artist came to me through you guys. So I want to thank you, first of all, for bringing him on. And second of all, I want to encourage more of that. I want to know what you guys, the people you guys want to see on the air, we will do. We will pursue to the ends of the earth and force them to come on, just like I did to Todd. Todd, how are you today?
Doing great, man. How about yourself?
Again, I'm pretty happy. I did have a misadventure yesterday with removing a nest of bees about the size of a volleyball from my basement. That led to that.
Ouch.
Yeah, I was wearing gloves.
Wow.
Good tip. Yellow Jackets do not care about gloves.
No.
At all.
Yellow Jackets are assholes.
Yeah, they definitely had a lot of mean streak in them at that point. Of course, I had also just hit them with a CO2 fire extinguisher to freeze them, so they weren't overly fond of the whole experience. Also, in the chat before we got on, which has been lively already, Al is talking about going to a drive-in to see the original Friday the 13th in October. Well, sir, you know what I did on Saturday? I went to the exact same drive-in you're talking about and saw Friday the 13th, the final chapter on the big screen. So I encourage it, guys. Get out there and support this stuff, because if we don't support it, it doesn't happen. That's true of movies. It's certainly true of books, which is an industry that is even tougher than movies. Maybe not to get this initial product made, but to get it in front of any eyes. That's absolutely true. So, Todd, you are the author of Devil's Creek, Final Reconciliation, A Life Transparent, The Smile Factory, Scanlines, and a bunch of things called Ugly Little Things.
Yes.
Which at first I wrote the word single author collection by it, and then I noticed that it seems to be more of a brand for you.
It started out that way. The first handful of Ugly Little Things stories were actually self-published, just on Kindle, little bite-sized stories. And the whole series got picked up by Crystal Lake in 2016, published in 2017 as a total collection, and just kind of went from there. So, they're little bite-sized short stories. A lot of my stuff tends to be long form, so calling them Ugly Little Things was kind of a joke for me.
Well, short stories definitely is something I wanted to discuss with you. And sure. Although it looks like most of these works, you tend to run on the longer side of the short story, right?
Yes.
So that makes it more appropriate for the new publishing format that's arising anyway. Because I remember the early discussions of the idea that anthologies may eventually not even be necessary, as people pick and choose and buy individual stories at a price that's kind of like a single rather than an album, if you would.
Yeah, I know that was kind of the thought process behind Ugly Little Things initially, because you were seeing a lot of that in the industry. Just single stories just put out there. The Kindle singles were just coming out at the time. I'm not sure I could see it going that way, though. Personally, I think if anything, we'll see more and more novellas coming out of that. That's it's something like 20,000 to 40,000 words, short, 150 pages. Paperback, something you can read on a flight. Just a few hours time. You look at, especially like the stuff that Stephen Graham Jones has out, like Mapping the Interior. His new one, Night of the Mannequins. Look at Laurel Hightower's New England Crossroads that just came out from Off Limits. Chad Lutzke's his entire catalog is novellas.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's really where things are headed, to be honest. I hope we don't see the death of the novel anytime soon, because I definitely have a soft spot for long books. Anybody who's read Devil's Creek knows that. So.
Well, I certainly agree with you, but I'm 70,000 words into something right now, and
nice.
Short is in the rearview mirror at this point. But I agree with you. I think that the novella is finally kind of doing what a lot of people said for the longest time it should, because as the attention span and just the free time available to people decreases, we have to suit the consumer. At the same time, the story has to be what the story is, right?
Right.
But a talented writer can, of course, accommodate both. I hate the word talented, and I just used it. So there you go.
It's okay.
I do feel like what we do can be taught and learned. Imagination is definitely a thing, but even that I think can be fostered. I think that idea that anyone's born to paint is kind of ridiculous, to be honest. We can disagree about that, but I have to get it out there.
That's okay.
So Cameron has a question in the chat. He phrased it about film, but I think it's a great question in general, which is, can you discuss the phenomenon of horror fans on social media only talking about films and books they love? If they don't like it, they ignore it. Few actually offer fair criticisms.
Wow, that's a great question. My gut reaction to that would be, I grew up being taught, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. I can only speak personally on that. There are a lot of films, and my friend Tony Ruffino and I go back and forth on this a lot, because he likes a lot of the schlockier, horror films out there, and I like more of like the art house stuff. That came from just studying some film in college, and so I do appreciate a good schlock horror film from time to time, but I think that people are reticent to criticize a popular film, especially on social media, just because right now it seems like any unpopular opinion on social media tends to blow up, and can go from hey, I didn't like this movie very much, to I'm gonna fucking kill you. Yeah. There's this drastic escalation, and there's no real discourse. I think it would be great if I could go on to Facebook right now and say, hey, that Charlie Kaufman adaptation of I'm Thinking of Ending Things is fucking horrible, but I'm not going to, because I know I got a lot of friends who liked it, and I really just don't have the time or energy to get into an argument about it.
Well, that's kind of one of the things that this community has been all about, is we want people to express their unpopular opinions rather than their popular ones, because popular opinions is nothing to discuss. But we're all going to just hold hands and say we all love Psycho. Yeah, Psycho's a great friggin' film, no question about it, but there's really not a lot to say as far as your opinion of the film anymore. Listen, I did a debate on this channel a couple weeks ago in which I took the position that Aliens is an awful film, which I believe, by the way. That's an unpopular opinion. But you know what? I didn't get hate mail over it.
Okay.
So I think you could build a community if they understand that we're talking about positive discourse and that we truly love this stuff. Doesn't mean you have to love everything.
Oh, I agree. And I would love for there to be, more civil discourse, especially when it comes to, popular things. I'm not a huge Marvel fan. I only just recently during the quarantine watched all the Marvel films. My wife's a huge Marvel fan. It just didn't really appeal to me. I'm also not a Star Wars guy. Sorry.
I like that. I like exactly 2 Star Wars films, so I'm with you, man.
Yeah, it's and
I mean,
every time I bring that up, especially to my friends who are huge Star Wars fans, it's like, why not? It's got this and it's got this. I'm like, I just don't care for it, man. It's not me. It's always like, what's wrong with you if you don't like this? It's never, well, what don't you like about it?
Right.
And then you have an opportunity to state, well, here's what I don't like. And, it just doesn't work for me. For me, that's important to discourse, especially when you're talking about something like that. You need to give both parties the chance to say, we respect their opinion, and say, give them the room to say why they don't like something. You're not trying to sway their opinion per se, just, let them have their opinion.
Absolutely. So let's back up a little bit. The question I ask on every single show, and I need to get your input on, how did you originally get bit by the horror bug?
Oh, man. I blame my mother. I mean that in a good way. So, only child for a good chunk of my early life until my mom remarried. So for a while, my mom and I were kind of living on our own, and we were living with my great-grandmother. And so mom was working during the day and going to class at night. She was a young mother, which left me to my own devices with my granny. And, she was an older woman, couldn't watch me 24/7. So my mom would always rent like a handful of movies to watch, because we lived in my granny's upstairs bedroom. There wasn't a cable hookup up there, so we did have a VCR. And my grandmother worked at the only rental place in town. I grew up in a very small town in Kentucky, so I got discounts on rentals. And my mom, it was not uncommon for my mom to go in on a weekend and rent like a stack of movies for, the week. And we're talking like a big stack, these clear plastic cases and stuff. Kids back before streaming was a thing. You had these cassettes, and they had to go into a device. And, I'm being facetious. So anyway, long story short, my mom would always rent movies for herself, and she would rent a few movies for me. But because I'm like upstairs in my room watching television all day, every day, I'm only going to watch those movies once. So I went through them pretty fast, and which led me to watching her movies while she wasn't home. My granny was downstairs doing whatever she was doing. So I got exposed to horror films at an extremely young age, about 3 or 4. At one point, and my mom loves to tell this story because it's perfect. So 2 of my favorite movies when I was a little kid was Evil Dead 2: Dead by Dawn and Maximum Overdrive. So we rented Maximum Overdrive so much that she had a friend who had a VCR copy the movie onto like a 6-hour cassette. And the way that worked back in the day is you'd have 2 TVs, 2 VCRs, and they would interface, and one would record the feed from the other as it's playing. So we had this one cassette. It had Maximum Overdrive at the beginning. It had Dirty Dancing in the middle for my mom, and then at the end was Evil Dead 2: Dead by Dawn. And I watched that cassette so many times that I guess by the time I was like 9 or 10 years old, the last time I can remember watching that tape, Dirty Dancing, you couldn't watch any of it because of how many times I'd fast forwarded through it. The tape was ruined in that section. So my mom never really got to watch Dirty Dancing whenever she wanted because it was ruined. But man, Maximum Overdrive, for as horrible as that movie is, I still love it. I can still quote it. Same with Evil Dead 2. Had an opportunity to meet Bruce Campbell about, 19 years ago on his first book tour. Chance to Kill.
I met him there too.
Yeah. Great guy. And got to tell him that story. And he said he was sorry for de-enhancing my life. So I grew up in horror. For as long as I can remember, there's always been horror. I remember watching Friday the 13th Part 6 at one of my birthday parties. None of the other kids were into that, of course. You know, Nightmare on Elm Street. God, I was always afraid of chainsaws, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I watched that at such a young age, I barely remember it, but I had a fear of chainsaws until I was in my teens. You know, and on top of that, my mom was also constantly reading horror. Like there was always a Stephen King book, there was always a Dean Koontz book. I distinctly remember a Rick Hatala novel on the nightstand.
Little Brothers?
Yes. Yeah.
I was peeking through the window of your childhood.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
Yeah, it's a thing I do sometimes.
That's okay. So, you know,
I think everyone had a copy of that. That's the only reason I said it.
Yeah,
it's kind of it's the rumors of horror fiction. So. Frampton Comes Alive and Fleetwood Mac rumors everyone had Little Brothers.
Yeah. So that was kind of my childhood. I was the weird kid. I was always watching horror films. I was always reading horror stuff. I mean, I started with R.L. Stine and John Bellairs and graduated to Stephen King, my mom's collection, and Dean Koontz, and from there, Clive Barker. You know, the rest is history.
So as comments and questions come through the chat, I'm going to make sure I get them on screen as they show up, even if it interrupts our conversation at certain points, simply because I'll lose them if not, because I'm very bad at this.
That's okay.
Tim says, Todd, we must be the same age because Scanlines resonated with me watching Traces of Death and playing GoldenEye on 64. How did Scanlines come to paper?
Well, yeah, Scanlines was kind of my ode to the late 90s, but it also was just an ode to... I wanted to write my own take on the coming-of-age story, but I wanted it to be as dark as possible. The end result with Scanlines was way darker than I expected it would be, to be perfectly honest. It went to some places that I myself was not prepared to go, but I went with it anyway. That book is, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's that book is entirely about suicide. It's about the ramifications of suicide, and writing about that, kind of recalling a lot of those memories of growing up as the poor kid with friends you kind of gravitated toward. You had a lot in common. Having a falling out with those friends, and all of that kind of ended up there, but with this overbearing cloud of a paranormal threat. I'm a huge fan of The Ring, the Japanese film Ring.
Thank you for clarifying that.
No problem. And also, but that's something that my agent had questions about. She's like, so when we spin this, is it going to be like The Ring meets something? I'm like, well, actually, it's more like Pulse. I prefer Pulse to The Ring, to be honest.
And you talk about the original Japanese film there as well, Cardo?
Yes. Although the Wes Craven one isn't terrible, I don't think. But yeah, the Japanese version is always going to be superior, just in terms of like the eeriness factor, I think.
That period has a great amount of atmosphere that's we can't reproduce. Ringu is one of my favorite films of all time, and I think Ringu Zero Birthday is actually a very different film, but I think it's almost the equal.
I haven't seen that one. That's on my watch list on Shudder.
It's the prequel, and it's excellent, but it's not what you're expecting it to be. It's not it's just not wash, rinse, dry, repeat. It's not at all.
Okay. Cool.
But, so Al is saying he's too lazy to read, but he loves audiobooks. So what of yours is available on audiobook?
Currently, the only work of mine that's available in audio is The Final Reconciliation. That is a King in Yellow meets progressive death metal story about a band called the Yellow Kings. Joe Hempel read that one, did a great job with the narration. Devil's Creek is coming to audio. I don't have an ETA on that, but I do know that they have nailed down a narrator. It's just a matter of when it falls into his schedule. And I believe the anthology Midnight in the Graveyard is also now available on audio. That has a story of mine in it called Holes in the Fabric that kind of bridges the story of the final reconciliation to Devil's Creek. It's kind of like a in-between story.
Cool. Very cool. So you grew up, horror movies were your first gateway. They were for me too. That's, I think, for our generation, I'm using that broadly. I don't know exactly your age, but I'm late 40s. I think very realistically, it's just that was our first introduction on UHF stations and early video cassettes, right?
Yeah.
But you find literature, probably in the form of paperbacks, mass market paperbacks afterwards. You said you graduated to King. I wanted to discuss a little bit with you, as I have been with several guests, what I call the King problem. And okay. I know that sounds a really scary thing to discuss, but it's not, because I love King too. I love early King especially. He's incredibly important. Only one I hold above him as an influence is Charles L. Grant as an editor, because I think the Shadows anthologies were probably more of the reason I wanted to write than King. But King definitely played a huge role. So do not take this wrong.
No.
But it seems like the mainstream entertainment media, once they had King as the face of horror, stopped covering much else besides Stephen King. I
would agree with that.
So it's not his fault. But he's kind of become a one-man industry as far as the entertainment trades are concerned anyway. Now, certainly there's been blips on the map, whether it's Robert McCammon, whether it's John Saul, whether it is Clive Barker. I mean, I'm hoping that Paul Tremblay actually can become more than that. But I see that as the major hurdle that most people working in the written side of horror right now have to contend to, is that there doesn't seem to be an easy way to break down that wall for even wider success.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation, and you're voicing some issues that I myself have seen. It's kind of hard to contend with the guy who is largely credited with putting horror on the map and making it a successful thing. But I mean, I myself, and I'm sure every other writer out there, talking to someone who isn't a writer, or as a friend of mine would say, one of the muggles, talking to them and being asked the question, so why are you working here? Aren't you like, if you're a horror writer, shouldn't you be making like millions of dollars? Like, well, that's correction. Stephen King is making millions of dollars. I am making pennies, sometimes half pennies.
Like when you go to the gas station, that 9/10 of a cent at the end, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It can be very frustrating, because there are so many amazing horror writers writing today. Like, I know many others share this opinion that we're kind of on the cusp of another horror boom. I think we are.
Absolutely.
And you see, you mentioned Tremblay. Paul's on. He's. I think Paul is
on the bubble.
He's one of our superstars. Even if he doesn't like pickles, you fucking weirdo. Love you, Paul.
Come on the show, Paul. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, just come on the show, Paul. Now, Paul's a good guy.
Yeah.
Josh Mallerman is another one. He's his career is on an upward trajectory, and I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. It also helps that Mallerman is also, as I would say, as prolific as King. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to talk to him, or even if you follow him on social media, that guy is always working on something. Like, he doesn't take downtime when it comes to stories. I'm envious of that. You know, you have folks like that. You got Brian Keene, who, you know, I would say, especially in, I mean, he's obviously, you know, horror grandmaster. You know, I forget where he got that title, but, you know, he's well revered. He does great things with the Scares and Care charity. I mean, I would put him up there, maybe like one notch below King in terms of popularity. So
I just see this modern, this new Gothic movement that's being put out as literature, but it's all horror. Danielle Trussoni or Sylvia Moreno Garcia.
Yes, I was going to mention that.
Yeah, Stephen Graham Jones. I mean, these guys they're making it, but they're not making it with the horror name really attached to them in the mainstream. That's
something that frankly kind of pisses me off. That, you know, just call it horror. That's exactly what it is. You know, you see novels like Bird Box and A Head Full of Ghosts marketed as thrillers. They're not thrillers. Those are horror stories. And that's even something that, you know, my agent and I had a long talk before, you know, when I was writing Devil's Creek, is that, you know, she's like, so is this a supernatural thriller? I'm like, no, this is a balls to the wall horror story. You know, period. Full stop, horror story. You know, I don't want it marketed as a thriller. And I feel like that is something that the publishing industry, that's not a reflection on the authors at all. That's the publishing industry.
Yeah.
You know, they're afraid of calling something horror, even though you see horror films left and right now, making
television shows, music borrowing heavily. Everywhere. Television commercials, insurance commercials.
But the publishing world, you know, the mainstream publishing world anyway, they are so scared of calling something a horror novel. And it's mind-boggling. Because it's like, you know, I mean, I'm looking in the background of your screen right now. I see nothing but horror memorabilia. You know, if you could pan around and see all of my stuff, I have horror memorabilia. Yeah, exactly. I've been to these conferences. Horror fans have deep pockets. So if I were working in publishing, you know, it seems like a no-brainer to me from the business side of things. You know, hell yeah, call it horror. You know, just, it's frustrating. It's extremely frustrating.
And it's frustrating too, because on the other side of it, the bookstores don't know what to do with it either. They don't know where to shelf it. Barnes & Noble very publicly put their horror section back in their stores, which sounds on paper to be this great thing. But when you actually walk there, there's 3 or 4 authors represented.
There's like, you know, half of the section is entirely Stephen King and Dean Koontz.
Well, from literally from the top to the bottom in my closest Barnes & Noble, for one whole 4-foot section, it's just King. And then there's a second section, which is everyone else, which again is only like 3 writers.
Yeah.
So they're not even filing everything that belongs there. For probably intentionally, it's probably market-based. But I think we got to break through that.
I agree.
So no pressure, but you're responsible.
I'm doing everything I can, man.
Okay. So we've also kind of danced around this idea. The publishing industry has changed fundamentally, and they seem kind of rudderless about the future. Books will be around. Stories will be around. They will always be told. I am not an extinctionist, you know, but I do think that we're looking at a world where bookstores are up for grabs. That whole retail structure may be completely outdated at this point. It might just be. And I will be forever sad if that's the truth. But I mean, when we lost Borders, people said it couldn't happen. Barnes has obviously struggled for so long now. Where do you see the future there?
Well, once upon a time, I would have said, brick and mortar bookstores are dead. But they've continued to cling to life. And in fact, you've seen a resurgence in the last, you know, probably 10 years of support for the mom and pop, you know, independent bookstore. Even now, like, there's a huge push to support independent bookstores, primarily because Barnes & Noble is not all about books anymore. Borders is gone. I frankly miss Borders. I love Borders. They had a better selection.
Yeah, they weren't all about the coffee yet.
Yeah, exactly. You don't. It's crazy to me whenever I go to my local Barnes and Noble, and it's how much of it is just DVDs and toys. And it's like
Funko. You can buy Funko Pops anywhere. We don't need them in the damn bookstore.
Yeah, exactly, and you get them cheaper too elsewhere. So, if anything, I think we're gonna see. I don't think a big box store like Barnes and Noble is going to go away per se. I think you'll see something that rises to take its place, even if it's Amazon. They're pushing their brick and mortar locations more and more. But I don't think, and I say this with a hint of optimism and wishful thinking, I don't think the mom and pop independents are going to go away. Not fully. I sure as hell hope not. Because, especially, you don't really have as many around here, where I live in Pennsylvania, but I know just in New England specifically, and also on the West Coast of Howells, there are so many mom and pop bookstores, everywhere, it seems like. And yeah, in my experience, it seems like when it comes to support for an author specifically, the mom and pops are way more receptive to that. Unless you're Stephen King, and then, you can kind of just take your pick.
For the life of me, I can't understand why Stephen King has just not opened a subscription service.
Right.
I mean, but his fans will buy it. For the convenience, you throw in one extra short story a year and you're done. Get 2 novels and a short story. First dibs on reissues and deluxe editions or whatever.
Well, I think part of the issue is that he's kind of an old-fashioned player when it comes to that a little bit. I mean, he does like to branch out and try new things. I mean, he remembers the Plant ebook back in the late 90s, early 2000s that he never finished. He was like, I forget how much he was charging for that, but it was like a PDF that you could read on like your Palm device.
Yeah. Well, he was also early in the audiobook on cassette movement in the 80s, which kind of keeps coming up and keeps dying, but this time it seems like it's going to just survive. Once we got out of a physical format, it seems to have hit its sweet spot.
Yeah, I listen to way more audiobooks now than I used to. Audible is just so damn convenient. I mean,
and the production's so much better than it used to be.
Oh, yeah.
So Jacob has a question that I thought was addressed to me, but it was actually addressed to you with my name on it.
Okay.
Does that make any sense? No, but let's do it anyway. What recent horror novels, film, TV excited you?
Let's see. Horror novels. First one that pops into my head, 2 of them actually. Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. That novella blew me away. If you guys haven't read that, you need to get on that right now. Also, A Lush and Seething Hell by John Horner Jacobs. That one also blew me away. That one is specifically like 2 larger novellas and one collection. It's fantastic, especially if you like cosmic horror. Film wise, well, I mean, I just watched Color Out of Space again. I love that adaptation. I thought Richard Stanley did a great job with that.
Have you seen the Ivan Zakuun adaptation of the same story from about 12 years ago? It's called. I'm sorry, there's noise in the system right now. It was called Color from the Dark.
I haven't.
It has Debbie Rochon in it. It's actually it's Italian. It's straight up Italian. It's not like an American co-production or anything. He's made a career basically adapting Lovecraft anyway.
Okay.
But really worth it. I prefer his version to Stanley's, only because I think Stanley's version falls apart in the last half, and I hate that the young daughter is a Wiccan. Simply because I feel that's like so opposed to where Lovecraft's head would have been at. It's a little bit too cute, if you know what I'm saying.
Okay. The only other adaptation of Color Out of Space that I can recall seeing was The Curse that came out back in the 80s with Will Wheaton, which was more of just a public service announcement about not drinking water in Tennessee.
Well, Lucio Fulci did direct the gore insert shots for that film, so it has
Really?
that. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was adapted before that as Die Monster Die with Boris Karloff.
Nice. I did not know that.
It's Lovecraft seems to get the same like 3 stories adapted endlessly. Charles Dexter Ward, Dunwich Horror. Oh my God, Shadow over Innsmouth. Please, never again. But anyway, are you a Lovecraft fan?
I am. Lovecraft was a big influence. The stories were a big influence on me. I'm not such a fan of the guy, more of a fan of his imagination. Very horrible views on that guy. I try to separate the stories from the man as much as I can anyway. Sometimes with his fiction you can't exactly do that. But yeah, Lovecraft was a big influence on me when I was a teenager. Especially, a lot of my stuff is cosmic horror-esque. It definitely has that vibe. And I wouldn't have that if not for reading Lovecraft and then reading his contemporaries. But another film that comes to mind, and I'll get some hate for this. I always do whenever I mention it. It Follows. I loved It Follows.
I know that there's a decent size of this audience that likes that film a lot. I don't. I like how it looks and I like what it wanted to do. But I always feel like it's not quite there.
Despite that film's flaws, and I admit it's got them, that last, confrontation scene in the pool, it's got issues. But for me, it was more about the feel and the atmosphere of that film and the dread. And when it comes to writing horror, that's something I always try to approach, is the dread aspect. I feel like that lingers with the reader, and it also lingers with the viewer. I've watched that film so many times just to try to understand its chemistry and how to adapt that into my own work. And it's one of those stories that the first time I watched it, I'm like, fuck, I wish I'd written this. I wish like hell I'd written this. And that would be my other selection for the film question. TV, I don't watch TV all that much. I think American Horror Story is garbage.
I've never seen any of it. I don't watch television pretty much at all.
Yeah, you're not missing anything. It's just it's repetitive.
That's exactly my problem. People talk about those premium shows on cable or even now, like the networks have taken over, but it's the same format of every episode. Like first 15 minutes deals with whatever the cliffhanger was from the last episode. They build towards a big jump or twist 3/4 of the way in, and then you end with a denouncement that leads you to the next episode. But it's like the same pacing for every one of those shows.
Yeah, I mean that comes from the format of writing for TV. I mean, it's probably unavoidable with that as far as that goes. But when I say American Horror Story is repetitive, it's literally the same season over and over again, just in a different setting or time period. And they always do the same thing. They have a great villain they set up and they kill him off halfway through and have someone else take his place who's far less charismatic, and the Freak Show season, for example, they had the clown. Spoilers, they killed the clown off halfway through the season. And then, I lost interest after that. It's like, that's me, and I'm contrary like that.
So that's the Twin Peaks thing, right? So he'd mentioned Twin Peaks earlier before we went on the air. So this is fair game. Second season, I love the revelation of Bob. I love the resolution of the Laura murder mystery. And you have 3 episodes where not a whole lot happens, and everyone in the world stopped paying as close attention. And then we wonder why we lost this great show.
Yeah, that's fair.
I wish it hadn't happened that way. Although I'm pretty happy with what we did get because that happened.
I feel like that show would have benefited also from the shorter seasons we have now.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that second season just goes on for so long, and they're like the parts you mentioned, and then the parts with Wyndham Earl at the end. I feel like if they could have just cut all the shit out in the middle and just brought them together, that would have been amazing.
Absolutely, but it still was extraordinarily well written television for any time.
It was
even when it was bad. It was good.
Yeah, it was so bizarre. Like there was literally nothing else like that on TV before or really since. I mean, there have been imitators, but I don't think they've really captured the same vibe, and that's uniquely David Lynch. So
Tim has a question. I'll bring us back to your work. What were you listening to while writing Final Reconciliation?
Actually, you can listen to what I was listening to while I wrote Final Reconciliation. There is a Spotify playlist out there. If you search it, it's called The Final Reconciliation. Matter of fact, I have Spotify open. I'll give you a little taste of what I listen to. I listen to a lot of Opeth, a Swedish progressive metal band.
I think they'll know.
Yeah. I listen to a lot of Opeth, listen to a lot of Mastodon. This playlist is kind of a good mix, though. It's not like all one thing. Ghost, I listen to Ghost. I actually discovered Ghost while I was writing Final Reconciliation, and it was perfect. The Cult, Guar, Eagles.
What era Cult?
Sonic Temple.
Okay.
Sun King is like the first track. Some AC/DC, Alice in Chains, Judas Priest, Blood Ceremony, Triptychon, Slayer, specifically the song Disciple from God Hates Us All. I listened to a lot of that stuff writing Final Rec. And once I kind of had that playlist in place, I really just put that on repeat. Although it's something I tend to do with my writing is when I'm kind of in the groove, especially when I'm in a scene and I have a song in mind that really fits the mood, I will put that song on repeat. And I think if my wife had to hear The Drapery Falls by Opeth one more time, she was going to kill me. I love that song. It's so good.
So let me ask you. So do you search out music that fits the mood that you're trying to convey, and get to the headspace? Is that what we're doing?
Yes. It's kind of like a meditative process in a way. Like I picked it up from reading an interview many years ago with Chuck Palahniuk, where he talked about listening to a certain song on repeat while he writes. And the whole idea is that once after a point, you don't hear it anymore. It's more just like this mantra sort of thing to help you get in the mood and the zone. And I've imitated that, and I still do it to this day. Typically, I'll start out with a playlist of songs, and I don't have an issue listening to songs with lyrics while I write. It doesn't bother me. A lot of people don't do that, but I'll try to find songs that really fit the theme or the mood, sound. Kind of gets into that place that I'm going for in the story, and then once I kind of hit upon a specific scene that I'm working on, and there's a song that just really fits that one, I will put that on repeat and just listen to that over and over again until the scene's done.
I had a particularly hard scene to write. I mean, hard as in extremely violent, but I wanted it to have emotion inside the violence, which is can be a distracting thing because, you know, when you write violence, they have to be quick sentences.
Yes.
Long, flowery sentences just doesn't play to the reader. So words were important. Real estate was important. And so, and I needed to be in a headspace that was very dark. So I, first of all, went to a website I should not have and watched a bunch of real life death videos, which I never do.
Wow.
Because I wanted to numb out the way that that stuff numbs you out. And then I immediately turned on Minor Threat and wrote the scene. And I had to do remarkably little editing to it to be where I needed to be. So I think the process you're talking about works. Using media to get to headspace. I believe in that there's 5 levels of thought. And I believe once you push the music back to maybe the second or third layer of thought, you're not hearing it, but it's still affecting you. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
It sounds kind of hippie-ish, which I'm sorry about, but
that's okay.
I think there's something there. So we've talked a little bit about who your modern favorite writers are. And I think it's an amazing list, by the way. How about your historical influences? I mean, we talked a little bit of Lovecraft. You obviously name dropped Chambers as I did at the beginning of the video by sheer coincidence.
Yeah, that was kind of crazy.
Which I think Chambers needs to be thought of in the same breath as Lovecraft. And I wish that we'd lived in that world, but I don't think we're ever going to get there.
Unfortunately, no.
Who else historically was important to you? And it doesn't have to be 100 years ago. It can be a Blatty. It can be a Thomas Tyrone.
Albert Camus. The Stranger was a huge influence on me when I was in high school. It was, you know, it was one of those books that you read at the right time. You know, I don't mean to cheapen it by comparing it to like Catcher in the Rye, but I mean, with Catcher in the Rye, you kind of have to be a teenager to really enjoy that book. I tried reading it a few years ago as an adult. I found it awful. But I remember reading that when I was in high school and really connecting with it. Camus was such a big influence on me in ways that I didn't really comprehend until after I got to college and really started to like dig into, you know, the philosophy of it all. Just the concept of existentialism in general really, I don't know, it really put a lot of my life in perspective when I was 17, 18. And I don't know if it necessarily impacted my writing per se. I think it, in terms of style, definitely not. But in terms of just inspiration, as far as taking a story, you know, that you can take at face value, or, you know, also between the lines, there's a whole other subtext going on. For me, that was that novel that kind of showed me that that was possible. That was a big influence. I don't know if this would count historically because he's still alive, but the work of Haruki Murakami, that was influence on me. College, shortly after college, in my 20s. Chambers, of course. There is an author only that we know of, only ever wrote 3 short stories. H.F. Arnold, The Nightwire. If you're not familiar with that weird story, check that out. That's one of my all-time favorites. That was one of the most popular stories of weird tales ever published. We don't even know who H.F. Arnold was, actually. Don't know if man or woman. Don't.
Well, you know what? That's inspiring in a way and dispiriting in another. Because the work survived on its own without any baggage, right? Mm-hmm. So that's amazing. That means the work really is that good.
Yeah.
On the other side of it, though, man, the accreditation back to the creator is never going to be in place.
No, like we don't know if H.F. Arnold was a pseudonym or what. Stephen Graham Jones actually wrote a story that kind of discussed that and posited that what if H.F. Arnold was actually female? I think in the 40s, H.F. Arnold was some guy, but no, it's equally possible it was a lady who wrote those stories.
Well,
I think it would be even better if it were.
We've talked so much on this channel. I've had a lot of female literary guests, and we talk a lot about just the role the genre has played as far as gender in art. And, horror has been more inclusive than most genres, as specifically when I'm talking about, gender.
Yeah.
In race, I don't think any publishing has been very good. So it's not probably worth having a discussion until tomorrow. But in gender, I think the horror genre has done actually a pretty admirable job, to be honest with you, compared to most other genres.
Compared to others, yeah, I think you're right. Although horror does have its issues.
Oh, definitely.
I think because there was just a Twitter thread I saw over the weekend actually about some anthology editor saying that they never accept stories from female authors because the anthologies don't sell as well, and I think that's ludicrous. And I know a lot of anthology editors, and like I've talked to Doug Morano about this, on a few occasions, and it's like if you aren't finding good stories by
then they're not looking.
People, then you're not looking very hard. It's like there are plenty of horror authors out there who are female or a person of color, and they're fantastic. And it's just they can't see beyond their their limited viewpoint.
I'd like it to be a very organic process. Obviously, I would love that just the stories get submitted or they get the invites and the anthologies are put together blind to all this, because it would be unnecessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the end goal. I think that we have to be careful about anthologies that try and have just one type of person, any one type of person, as its focus, simply because I think that in the long term, that's going to slow the progress. But what we need is a very fair, open process for all voices. And that's a tough thing to get to. It seems. It shouldn't be, but it seems like it's a tough thing to get to.
Yeah, the editing an anthology is definitely something I would never, ever, ever want to take on. Because it really is a difficult thing, I think, because you're never going to make everyone happy. And, say, if you had a excellent mixture of female authors, male authors, people of different ethnic backgrounds, you're always going to have some asshole saying, well, there's not enough of this, or there's not enough of this. And it's usually, a white guy. Let's be honest. It's usually an ignorant white guy who's making those claims. And I don't have I don't have a good solution. I'm not sure if anyone does, but it's definitely something that I think we collectively, as an industry, as people, need to work toward to be better, or at least try to be better.
I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I feel like the work is never going to be done by the industry. So what we have to do as consumers, because we all, even the creators, are consumers. Every time something comes out that we think deserves support, we need to support and we need to talk about it loudly. Because if it starts selling, all these arguments go away. All of it goes away.
I think I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that in terms of, the industry itself, like, we are the industry. The industry is people who work within it. And industry is not this, amorphous thing that doesn't have a face or a name per se. It's, we make up that industry. And I think collectively, if, we did what you said, that would definitely go a long way. I look at some of the authors out there who are just absolutely kicking ass right now.
Mm-hmm.
Try to do my part, at least sharing the work. You got Gabino Iglesias, you got Sean Cosby, Blacktop Wasteland that just came out. That guy's killing it right now. Getting tweeted by Stephen King and shit, and it's a crime novel. And that's awesome.
Well, that seems to be what King likes to read the most, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned forget her name, Sylvia
Moreno Garcia.
Yes. Mexican Gothic. I haven't read that yet. I've heard
awesome.
fantastic things. Yes.
So here's my only warning to everyone out there about Mexican Gothic. Okay, it is what the title tells you it is. It is not. It is not a balls to the wall gore fest. It is a Gothic novel. Now, if you love that, it is a great example of it. It's awesome, and also it is unapologetically Mexican. It shouldn't be a surprise.
Oh, it's in the title.
I loved it. I'd also just like to put V Castro, my guest from a couple weeks ago, in that mix.
Yes.
She's working at a different level. I mean, that's more popcorny. I shouldn't say pop. I mean, it's more like pop fiction-y than literary. But I think there's important work that needs to be done there too, and she's doing it.
Definitely. I'm trying to think of her name, and I know I'm going to butcher her name. Cynthia. Shit. I got to look this up.
As you do that,
I'm horrible about this.
As you do that, I think the overall point is just that the talent is out there. And again, there's that word again. I was using it as like a noun. The talent is out there. We have to find a way to support people and get people off of just this wait for the next King novel routine, because this is kind of the same topic that we keep coming back to. The industry and the mainstream entertainment magazines will follow the lead if this stuff starts selling and they can't ignore it.
I absolutely agree.
So we got to do it. It's us.
Well, I'm doing everything I can, and I will continue to do so.
I hope I'm doing enough. I always wonder. Jacob has a comment here.
Cynthia Pelayo.
Pelayo.
Sorry.
I wasn't sure who you were talking about, but now I feel like an idiot.
That's okay.
So Jacob has an interesting comment here. He has to say, if I had to say what two horror novels are the most important or essential, it'd be The Haunting of Hill House and Frankenstein, both written by women. So their voice is prominent in horror. Not just that, though. I mean, when you start to look at things like, if you go out and look at those pulp publications from the 40s, they're filled with female writers. Some under pseudonyms, but for some reason in horror and science fiction of that era, it wasn't quite as closed the door. And I think we have a lot to be proud of. Now, that doesn't mean we stop working simply because I'm saying we have a good history.
Yeah.
Don't mistake what I'm saying. But I am saying let's build on that because we already have laid the foundation. Whereas in other genres, if we're not talking about cozy mysteries or romance, those genres, generally speaking, have a lot more work to do than horror. So, I mean, and I'm not saying every genre has to be necessarily diverse. If it's just something that is just culturally not accessible, I guess that's fine. But the horror genre has no excuses because you saw the definition I used of the horror genre at the beginning of this video.
Yes.
It's about the effect on the audience, not about any trope that's within it. I will stand by that. I believe that. Well, there's nothing in that. In fact, I would say there's plenty in that means that different world experiences will only strengthen us. We don't dilute by getting diverse. We get stronger. Now, the Western, there might be an argument to be made. I don't know. So we've gone for about an hour here. Is there anything you wanted to let the audience know?
Well, sure. Yeah, if you want to check out my stuff, my website is toddkeisling.com. And don't worry, I know you mispronounced it. Okay.
Absolutely.
It's all right.
Don't worry, it'll happen again in my life.
It's okay. Dude, I am so used to people mispronouncing my name. It's it's a joke to me now. It's okay. Yeah, toddkeisling.com. My latest novel is Devil's Creek. It is available now, on Amazon in print and ebook, and an audio version is coming. It's reviewed pretty well, I think. I'm pretty proud of it. If you like small town horror, like Salem's Lot, for example, which was one of its inspirations, and you like cosmic horror as well, you might enjoy Devil's Creek. My novella Scanlines is actually completely sold out. It was a short run through Dim Shores. However, I'm hoping another press picks that up soon. So, stay on the, keep your eyes
on the radar.
Open. Yeah, and I'm Todd_Keisling at Twitter. So I'm pretty active on Twitter. Give me a follow, reach out, say hello, make fun of me. It's okay.
And all those links and a few more are actually in the description below this video already. So if you are lazy and don't want to watch him say that and try and type it out, just click the link in the description below this video. On this channel, we have the updated schedule. On Thursday, we have a panel discussion of the films of Tobe Hooper at 8 p.m. Saturday, we have another community show. The last community show was nearly a 4-hour ordeal if you watched. That begins at 2 p.m. and hopefully will end sometime before midnight. And on Monday, September 14th, we have the return of the game show, Critical Pursuit, at 8 p.m. As you know, I will be stepping down from the role of host into contestant. So I can embarrass myself proper next Monday. So you don't want to miss that. Well, Todd, I want to thank you for coming on in.
And thank you for having me. This was a great discussion.
I think that we have to have more discussions with more people from around the horror sphere in all respects. And I have been heavy on writers recently. I've realized that. But here's the thing. When I reached out to you because, again, members of my community wanted you on, you responded quickly. You said, hey, let's work it out. Let's find a schedule. And we put this whole thing together in a week. Yeah. And really in a day in the week. And then there was like 5 days of waiting for it to actually happen. That tells me that you give a shit. That's ultimately what it is.
I do. I mean, I try to listen. I'm grateful for anyone who wants to reach out to me because they've read something. They have a question about something they've read. I'm approachable. I'm a guy. I just write things. And so I'm pretty fortunate that people want to publish those things. But I'm try to be as down to earth as possible. Chuck Palahniuk's pretty much my role model when it comes to interacting with readers, and I try to follow his lead and just be, available to some extent. So yeah, anybody who wants to interview, me to come on their show, it's like, absolutely, let's do it. So I love horror. It's I love talking about it.
Well, this is the important work because we are not in a world where famous monsters or Fangoria can hold our hands anymore. The democracy of voice out there has a downside, which means everything gets drowned out as well online. So we have to, as a community, provide our own platforms. That's what this is. Before you go, Tim has one final question for you. And after you answer it, I'm going to run the credits.
All right.
Todd, is the Stafford, Kentucky mythos going to continue?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will see you guys in a couple days.
They make movies look bad. What, where should I start? I saw this movie.